Hello and welcome to Vestiges of History. If you're new here, my name is Dylan and I hope to earn your interest and subscription with the story I'm about to share with you today, and boy is it a doozy. If you're joining me again for another edition, welcome back. I hope you're having a glorious day. Now, what I have for you today is a subject I've been working on since probably 2013. This man is an enigma, a polygamist, an inventor, a seafaring man, industrial engineer, a spy, maybe. What we have of his is a pre-World War II merchant marine officer's uniform, ubiquitous for the men in the seafaring service, of a cotton khaki material usually worn in the summer, and if one happened to be in the South Pacific. This uniform features the officer's merchant marine insignia and bullion decoration, aka scrambled eggs, on the visor. Now, is there a name? Well, there's initials, OVK, written into the uniforms, and the hat. Well, luckily, came with piles of documents and a scrapbook. These are the belongings of one Otto von Kories. So, as I said, I've been pulling threads on this guy for a while. Every thread I pull gets weirder. I can tell you that Otto von Kories was born in 1888 in either Königsberg, Hamburg, or the Empire of Prussia, or even at sea. And the first time we see him in the historical record was when the Office of Naval Intelligence had him under surveillance. He was running a radio station out of his hut on Slayton Farms, a school for girls in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, where he worked as an engineer and groundskeeper. He worked here approximately from 1914 to 1916. Not long after, he leaves Slayton Farm to be an ambulance driver for a Jewish hospital in Pennsylvania. It gets odd. Tell you what, I'll just read the newspaper article because it's crazy. This is from the Pittsburgh Post, March 23, 1917. U-boat captain arrested in $25,000 Hart Balm suit. Otto once ran a U-boat, then a wireless station, but he erred when he ran from a Philadelphia miss. Yeah, how's that for a byline, right? Philadelphia, March 22nd. Suit to recover $25,000 in damages for alleged breach of promise was filed against Otto von Kories, who claims to have been the commander of a German submarine before the war and to have deserted the German steamer Prinz Oskar when the conflict began in order to take up his residence here by Miss Rose Needles, 916 Locust Street, and a capias for his arrest was issued. Bail was fixed at $300. Miss Needles charged that on December 22, 1914, he proposed to her and promised that the ceremony would be performed within a reasonable time. Despite her frequent demands, he refused to do so. At the same time, Miss Needles brought other charges against von Kories before Judge Gilpin of the Municipal Court, for which he was held under $400 bail for court and was allowed to sign his own bond. A true bill of the indictment will have to be returned against him by the grand jury before this second case can be tried. This combination of trouble for von Kories comes just 5 days after his marriage to Miss Dorothy Waldo, an instructor in the cooking school at Slayton Farms, where he is an engineer. Von Kories conducted a wireless plant at the school where he is employed, and is said to have received messages from Mexico, Germany, and Japan, and from the merchant submarine Deutschland, as she steamed up the Chesapeake Bay to Baltimore on her first trip to this country. He said he was forbidden by the Navy Department to make public any of the messages he received. He denied all knowledge of any German plot, and he applied for naturalization. He said he abhorred the Kaiser, and considered the U-boat warfare nothing but murder, and hoped and believed the German cause would end in disaster this summer. Von Kories claims to be a member of the German nobility, formerly a lieutenant in the German Navy, and commander of a submarine, and the holder of an Iron Cross, given for bravery during a battle with natives in Africa. He ridiculed the cross, however, saying that they were now so common as to be of no value. He said he ignored 2 commands to return to Germany for the war, and added that 19 members of his family had been killed in the war and his mother died heartbroken. So that's a lot to unpack there. We have a guy who's saying he's a U-boat captain. We have a guy who's saying he received an Iron Cross, which is an extremely high honor, at least for that time. We have a guy who purports to be of the German nobility, who has military experience, who is running a radio station, who is maybe having some amorous rendezvous with this young lady in an ambulance while he has a wife and a little daughter. At the end of it, that $25,000 suit was settled. So, with the romantic indiscretion seemingly behind him, he suddenly shows up as a vaunted mechanical engineer specializing in diesel engines. He purports to have worked directly with Rudolf Diesel in Germany before defecting to the United States in 1914. He then hops around the Northwestern Hemisphere, working at mines and factories, supervising the operation and maintenance of diesel engines. While working in the mechanical engineering field, we suddenly find Otto working as a mechanical engineer at the War Department at Fort Tilden, New Jersey in 1922. Is that not weird? We have a German national who was running a radio station now working for us, militarily speaking. He also finds time to join the Merchant Marines. As an engineer, he travels the globe aboard a ship between jobs, working with engines or teaching about them at a Los Angeles City College night class in the 1930s. But the late 1930s is when things begin to get interesting. He starts inventing things, like a coal retort, and an oil distiller to make gasoline, and a one-wing airplane, and a submersible submarine bus contraption thing. But then hold on, there's more. There's all these blueprints and plans for a factory in Japan, for a hydroelectric plant and the coal retort. He then goes into the merchant mariner life full-time in the late 30s. He lives and works in Japan, beginning in June of 1940, aboard the Tatuta Maru. He spends an abundant amount of time being toured around major cities, being allowed to take photographs, and having a personal bodyguard. He spent most of his time in Japan in 1940 and 1941, officially working with the Toyota Syndicate. Honestly, this looks like an intelligence gathering and misinformation effort against the Japanese. So, to frame this a little differently, Japan has been at war with China since the early 1930s, and being at war requires energy resources and infrastructure. So wouldn't a German-speaking industrial engineer with these skills and plans look attractive to Japanese businessmen who wish to support their country's agenda? Remember, Pearl Harbor is about a year away at this point. So if we look at some of the photos in his scrapbook, he is very fastidiously taking down names and locations. The facts that this German-born former U-boat captain turned inventor and engineer turned merchant sailor had ingratiated himself so tightly with members of the Japanese governmental industrial complex at the time is fascinating. He rents a home in Omori, a suburb of Tokyo, from a woman named Lydia Ann Corrales. On 6 January 1941, Otto marries Lydia, 14 years his junior, herself a native of Germany born in Schwagerau in 1902. Lydia is wife number 2, on paper at least, and they live a short but visually happy life in their home in Omori. A Major, where does that come from, von Kories, Lydia and her young daughter, Nauka, that she had from a previous marriage, make a picture-perfect family until Sunday, 29 June 1941, when von Kories is called back to the United States aboard the MS Heiyo Maru. Like, the dude even went through the trouble of lying on the paperwork the Japanese government needed to okay this marriage of two non-Japanese in the country. During the war years, Lydia and presumably Nauka found themselves in dire straits in a prison camp for all non-Japanese born citizens. In November of 1945, she tried to track him down, and curiously, he was a major in the army. So we have to remember, he leaves Japan on 29 June 1941. Pearl Harbor happens 6 months later. He can't get to Japan or have any communication with Lydia for the entire duration of the war. He effectively abandons her. During World War II, he was active in the Pacific with the Merchant Marine Service and worked primarily on tankers, taking fuel to newly captured islands to keep up the fight. In 1946, a Mrs. Evelyn Gilman is purportedly married to Otto von Kories, 21 years his junior, 36 and 57 respectively. That's wife number 3 and the youngest to boot. They meet and marry in Redwood City, California, where he just happened to be working as a steam plant engineer for WF Foods. The newspaper article shown here also mentions his wives Dorothy and Lydia. Was polygamy legal in California back then? I don't think so. In 1949, he applied to work for Pacific Tankers and lists his various skills and how many times he's been at sea. And from this, we glean that he had quite a long resume. Little is known about Otto after this time. He seemingly disappears. Apart from returning from Okinawa in 1950, there's nothing else. Otto von Kories passed away in 1957, the same year as Dorothy, his first wife of nearly 40 years. They are interned together in Pomona, California. Their daughter Edith Dorothy passed away in 1998. It is believed that is where this collection came from. Taken at face value, Otto von Kories is a fascinating character, at least to me, apart from all the moral stuff. Between 1917 and 1945, the man maintained 3 marriages in one form or another and worked around the globe at the same time. And he worked for 2 different governments. That much we know. Now, outside of the romantic choices, he lived what some might consider to be a full and exciting life. A life full of risks, for sure, and most likely a lot of heartache, but nonetheless interesting. He obviously was highly intellectual, inventive, and thought well outside the box. But this is still a very cautionary tale. I won't be placing a moral value on this because it's not my place. I will leave that to you. Otto von Kories the polygamist spy, or just an expert liar? Let me know in the comments. Thank you all again for joining me for this deep dive into another fascinating person in the hopes that we all can learn something. And this is definitely plenty to learn from here. Thank you. And as always, you never know who will tell your story. Live a storied life.